I have been working through the book of Job, looking at each verse and trying to analyze the Hebrew grammar inductively, along with commentary. And we have finished chapters 1 to 3 and chapters 38 to 42. And now we're picking up in chapter 4, and we'll continue to go through the text pretty much word by word from the Hebrew Bible with commentary. So we pick it up in chapter 4, where we will have the dialogue beginning between Job and his three friends. So after the prologue and the monologue of Job in chapters 1 to 3, the book now turns to the long dialogue between Job and his three so-called friends. There are three cycles to the debate. The first is covered in chapters 4 to 14, the second in chapters 12 to 21, and then the third in chapters 22 to 27. Their presuppositions of the theology of suffering is that it's because Job must have sinned. Job's friends conclude that since he is suffering, it's obvious that he must have sinned. Each one takes his turn, driving home this point, followed by a rebuttal of Job after each has spoken. So as we come to this chapter, the first speech of Eliphaz is found based on his personal experience. We see this in 4:1 to 5:27. The first speech of Eliphaz covers three basic areas. His theory is that only the guilty are punished. We see this in chapter 4, 1 to 11. His unusual vision and its message is then added. Chapter 4, 12 to 5:7. And finally, his subsequent counsel to Job in 5:8 to 27. Eliphaz's speech is very lofty and in many ways profound. The poetry is beautiful, but it is characterized by two errors. First, its lack of absolute sympathy, no sympathy for the sufferings of Job. And secondly, his absolutism that all suffering results from wickedness or iniquity. So I want to begin by looking at verses 1 to 11. And we start then with verse 1. Vaya'an Eliphaz ha-Temani vayomar. That is, and Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said. Vaya'an is from Anah, to answer. It's a cow imperfect, third masculine singular with a vav conversive. And said, Vayomer from Amar, a cow imperfect, third masculine singular from Amar with a vav conversive or vav consecutive. And so he continues, Hanisa davar elecha til'eh vatsur bemilin mi yuchal. If one venture a word unto you, will you be weary? But who is able to withhold words? We could render this, but to withhold with words, who is able? So we begin here by asking, or by Eliphaz asking Job uh, if he has a word that will he's really saying, if one venture a word unto you, will you be weary? Will you be weary of what I have to say? But he goes on to say, I can't help but speaking. If one should, and then he's going to move on to talk about how if one should venture a word, could you be weary to bear it? So he begins with a polite, we might say, beginning. Since Job is sick and suffering, he begins by asking Job if he would be able to take in his words. In spite, though, of Job's situation, he must speak. So this is the way it begins. And then we move to the next verse. Let me just say, Nisa here is if one should venture a word from Nasa, it's a PL perfect, third person singular from Nasa, masculine singular. So if one should venture a word to you, will you be weary? Weary. The root is la'ah, to be weary. It's a cow imperfect, second masculine singular from la'ah. But to withhold with words, atzor is the cow infinitive construct. So to withhold with words, who is able? Yuchal. From Yachal, to be able. Here we have a cow imperfect, third masculine singular from Yachal. And then he moves on. We move on to the next verse. Hine yisarta rabim v'yadayim rafot techazek. Behold, you have instructed many, and the hands of the weak ones you have strengthened, or you strengthen. Yisar is from the root nasar, or yasar, to instruct. It's a PL perfect, second masculine singular from yasar. Notice the I vowel followed by the doubling of the middle radical. So you have instructed many, and the weak hands, yodayim rafot, hands of weak ones, you have strengthened. Techazek is from chazak. We have a PL imperfect, second masculine singular from chazak. So you have strengthened the weak hands. So I think Eliphaz is saying, I'm going to now ask you to listen to what I'm going to share. So we move on to verse 4. Koshel yekimun milecha uver kayim koraot techamet. The words, your words, the ones who are stumbling, or the one who is stumbling, your words have held up, or lifted up, or upheld that one. And with the bending or feeble knees, you have strengthened. Or the one, we could say, and the feeble knees, you have strengthened. Here we have koshel is a cow participle masculine singular from kashal, to uphold, or to fall. So the one who was falling, you upheld with your words. Here we have a hifil imperfect, third person plural from common plural from kum. So you have withheld or held up the one stumbling or the one who was falling with your words. And then the weak knees you strengthen. Birkayim kora'ot from kara, meaning the knees of one that is bending or bowing down. You strengthen. Techametz is from chamatz, to strengthen. It's a PL imperfect, second masculine singular from chamatz. So you strengthen the weak knees. The one that was bowed down with weak knees, you help them. But now it is common to you, and it touches you, and you are terrified. Seems to be what Eliphaz is saying. Ki ata tavo elecha v'tele tiga adecha v'tibahel. That is, but now it comes unto you, and you are weary. Notice tavo is from bow. It's the cow imperfect, second masculine singular from bow. Now it comes into you, and you are weary. The root is la'ah, a cow imperfect, second masculine singular, to be weary or to weary, with a vav conversive or a vav consecutive. Tiga adecha, it touches unto you, and you are terrified. Tiga is from the pay noon verb naga. It's the cow imperfect, second masculine singular from naga. It was historically tinga becoming tigga, where the noon of the root has assimilated into the gimel. And so it touches unto you, and you are terrified. Vatibahel is the nifal imperfect, second masculine singular from bahal, to terrify. So you are terrified. Notice the IA vowel pattern indicative of the nifal imperfect. So the thought here is that Eliphaz further irritates Job's wounds rather than helping to heal Job or to heal his wounds. He accuses Job of instructing others and strengthening their weak hands and feeble knees when they had really undergone suffering. But now, when it faces him, he faints. Apply your past words to yourself now, is Eliphaz's sharp reproach. It is interesting, Peake makes the comment that the air and unsympathetic treatment of Job by Eliphaz, when he says that Job's disease needs not an irritant, but something that would provide comfort. And this is a quote from Peake. So instead of providing comfort, Job is giving the opposite. Then we move on to verse 6. And it reads, Halo yiratecha kislatecha, tikvatecha vatom derachecha. That is not your fear of God, your confidence, and your hope, the perfection of your way, or the integrity of your ways? As we look at this verse, Job is being asked, is not your reference to God, your rat hashamayim, your fear of heaven or your fear of God, is not that your confidence and your hope? the integrity of your ways or the life that you have tried to live? Isn't that your hope? It is interesting that as we look at this text, two questions are implied by Eliphaz. Is not your hope in God? Is not your confidence in your righteous way of life? If these are true, then Job has no reason to fear God. He will not totally destroy an innocent person. Job is called to trust God for the lesson of discipline he is to learn from this and wait for God's ultimate deliverance. We'll see this further developed in chapter 5, 17, and following. So we move on then to verse 7 as we continue going through the text. Notice it says, Sechorna, mihu neki avad, ve'efo yesharim nechadu. Remember now, who is it? Who is it that was innocent that has perished? And where have the upright been hidden? Or we could say, been effaced, cut off by being hidden or by being effaced by God. Zachar is a cow imperative, second or masculine plural from Zachar. Remember now, who is it that was ever innocent that perished? Avad is the cow perfect, third masculine singular from avad. Or where were the upright? Nechadu. Nechadu is from chadad to kadad, or kachad, I should say, to hide or to efface. And here we have a nifal, a perfect third common plural from kachad. So, or where were the upright effaced? I think we could translate it, or cut off. And so the question that Job now is being addressed, where would those that really trusted the Lord, where were they really cut off? And Job had previously cried for death in chapter 3. But Eliphaz assures him that only those who are wicked and plow or plot iniquity are suddenly cut off with death. And we'll see this repeated here. He therefore, by his trust in God, can expect restoration. This seems to be implied. Eliphaz says, remember now, whoever, being innocent, has perished, or where were the righteous cut off, or we could say effaced or hidden. Such theory is not always true, as will be shown later, since both the wicked and the righteous experience the same fate, often of sudden death. And so we'll see that what Eliphaz said will be refuted later in the book. And then we move on to talk in verse 8 about they that plow iniquity reap the same. Ka'asher ra'iti chorashe aven ve'zorei amal yiktseruhu. According as I have seen, that they who plow iniquity and they who sow, I guess we could say, mischief or trouble by their sinful actions, yik seruhu. Here we have ra'iti is the cow perfect first common singular from ra'ah, a lamed hey verb, where that I historically a lamed I verbs are final I verse where that yod comes back. As I have seen, the ones that plow iniquity. Chorashe is from charash, to plow, a cow participle, masculine plural, from charash. So the ones who plow iniquity and sow amal, sow mischief. Notice Zora A from Zara, to sow, is the cow participle, masculine plural, from Zara. Those that sow mischief, yik retsuhu, that is, they reap it. They reap it. As a man sows, so shall he also reap. The root is katsar, to reap. It's the cow imperfect, third masculine plural, from katsar, with a final pronominal suffix in the hu, a third masculine singular. So the ones who sow mischief, they reap it. And in the New Testament, as one sows, so he also reaps. We find this in the book of Galatians. Then, as we move on, looking at verse 8, what he's really saying here is those who do wickedness are going to be cut off, are going to be effaced, are going to be judged. And so, as he moves on in verse 9, he illustrates it by how God, by his breath, judges the wicked. Notice, minishmat Eloha yovedu, umeruach apo yiklu. From the breath of God, they perish. And from the blast, or the breath of his nostrils, and we could understand this to mean his anger, apo. Op is often the word for nose, but it also means anger, like when the nose gets red, it's looking at somebody being angry. So from the breath of his anger, they are consumed. Yovedu is from avad. It's a pay aleph verb, a cow imperfect, third person masculine plural, from avad. And then from the breath of his anger, yiklu, they are consumed, from kala, a cow imperfect, third masculine, or a cow perfect, third masculine singular, from kala. A cow perfect, third masculine plural, from kala, or third common plural. So what we see here basically is the Hebrew is following what is very common in poetry, Hebrew parallelism. So by the breath of God they perish, and by the breath of his anger they are consumed. Both lines then say the same thing for purpose of emphasis. By God's breath the wicked perish. The picture of God's anger then is likened to the scorching desert winds which destroy herbage or crops. God's wrath is like that in its ferocity of destroying the wicked person. And this is what Job, or what Eliphaz is wanting to drive home. And while sometimes in the Hebrew Bible we certainly see God's wrath against the wicked, but in this instance, we know that Eliphaz is totally wrong, because Job was not suffering because of the wrath of God. Then we move on to verse 10. Sha'agat aryeh v'kol shachal v'shenei chefirim nitahu. The roaring of the lion and the howling, or the voice of the lion. There's two words here for lion. One, aryeh, and shachal. And it could be looking at a large line and a medium line, but we don't know. It could be used, I think, interchangeably for both here. V'shinei hefirim nitahu. That is, the teeth of the young lions are broken. Notice here, nitahu comes from nata, to break. It is a nifal, perfect third common plural from nata with this noon prefix. So the teeth of the young lions are broken. It seems here that Eliphaz is continuing to emphasize the destruction of the wicked by showing their helplessness after God's judgment on them. And this will continue in verse 11. Notice it says, Layish Oved Mibli Tarif. That is, the lion or the old lion perishes because of lack of prey. Uvene lavi yit paradud. Yit paradu. That is, the old lion is perishing from lack of prey. Oved is from the root avad, to perish. It's a participle, a cow participle, masculine singular from avad. So the old lion perishes for lack of prey. And I think the thought is it just is not able to catch the prey like it did. And the whelps, or the sons of the lion, or the lioness, we should say, lavi, are scattered abroad, are divided or scattered. Yit paradu is from parad, to divide or scatter. So hitpael, imperfect, third person, third masculine plural, from parad. So it's the imperfect form, of the hitpael. So the whelps, we could say, of the lioness are then scattered abroad. Eliphaz, as we said, is emphasizing the destruction of the wicked by showing their helplessness after God's judgment. He does it, it seems, under the figure of lions, which are destroyed or scattered after an attack. 5 different Hebrew words for lion are used, showing the different sizes, and some take that approach here, of lions which are defeated. The teeth of the young lion are broken. The old lion is unable to catch the prey anymore because of his age, and perishes in hunger. The young cubs then are scattered to find their own food and protection. Such is the picture of the wicked, it seems, that Eliphaz is saying. Though strong and mighty, they eventually perish under God's judgment, and those who depend upon them are scattered. And while there's truth in what Eliphaz is saying, in a general sense, it is wrong applying it to Job. That's the interesting study of the book of Job. Some of the things that are said in these speeches by Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar are true in some cases, but not in all, and certainly not in Job's case, where he was not suffering because he had done something wrong. And I think this addresses those that sometimes even preach that that judgment comes if you don't have enough faith, or if you, sometimes we have the faith in we could say health, wealth kind of gospel, where it is taught that if you just have enough faith, you'll have all kinds of health, you'll have money, etc. Well, this is really not true. And I think one of the things that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have faith in the Lord, but I think spiritually, the Lord blesses those who have faith in Him. We know that, but it may not always be with the material blessings. And I think that's important to understand. So, at any rate, the book of Job is a fascinating book. I hope it's helpful if someone might have an interest in following along, working through the grammar and working through the flow of thought, verse by verse, of this great book.